Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Brooklyn-based jazz guitarist Cameron Mizell. He has a new CD out called Local Folklore, done with Charlie Rauh back in 2021, taking listeners down familiar roads but ends up in fresh destinations, each with its own cast of characters, lessons, and stories to tell. He's originally from St. Louis, Missouri, and has released 8 albums in the past 17 years. They range from jazz funk to Americana to avant-garde experimentalism, and he's collaborated or produced artists on dozens more recordings. He's been consistently a part of a very diverse New York City music scene, and he's got great tales to tell. Enjoy.
Hey, thanks for taking a minute out for the show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You bet. You have a brand new album that's come out, and, right now we're at a very particular time with COVID, and, we're going back and forth with all of this, and again, we're in this variant mix. How does this feel to have a new album out now and probably the possibility, better than ever, to actually perform this live and to give it to people that really need new music?
Yeah, this album, in a way, was possible because of the circumstances surrounding the pandemic, not necessarily the negative things that a lot of people experienced, but more about getting to know our neighbors and, our neighborhoods. And a lot of the music was inspired by that kind of community, building new friendships and building a better understanding of the places where we're from, but also where we live now. So, in a lot of ways, the pandemic kind of inspired this music to come together. And as far as performing it live, we did a release show on the October 29th, the day the album came out. That was actually in the garage behind the house where I live. And so a bunch of neighbors came and, gathered outside, and we had a fire pit and a bunch of food. And it was just this really amazing, gathering of about 50 or so people from the neighborhood and friends coming from other parts of the city. And getting to play the music live in that setting was really kind of special for us.
Well, I guess that's the thing about all of this is the tenacity that the musician had to acquire over this time, because you had to make things work. But it's actually kind of cool to have that latitude to do it in your actual house and in a neighborhood. And since you talked about this is really kind of celebrating community, it probably was a good full circle event.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be able to say that, like, this song is about, or this song was inspired by these people, or this, I was going for a walk over here, and people kind of, from around here can absolutely relate to that. And so it made the music a little bit more personal for a lot of them, I think.
So what do you ultimately hope anyone out there that downloads or buys this album gets from this experience?
What Charlie and I were trying to do really was just write music that was very strong melodically and would kind of evoke some personal connections that we feel. And I don't necessarily ask that listeners experience things from my perspective. I hope that they kind of have their own perspective on the music, but I would hope that maybe they kind of find a similar connection that maybe relates to some of their surroundings and the people that they know, and maybe they can kind of understand the ideas that we were feeling when we wrote this stuff. It's not necessarily, doesn't have to specifically be about this one person in my life. It could be about a similar person that occupies the same kind of role and space in somebody else's life.
So talk to me a little bit about the neighborhood you're in, to give me a little bit more of a kind of a texture for the album and what your neighborhood and where you're at is exactly like.
Sure, yeah. I live in a neighborhood called Windsor Terrace in Brooklyn, which is kind of a small area that's tucked between Prospect Park, which is the big park, kind of the central park of Brooklyn, Greenwood Cemetery, which is a historic cemetery, a very old area, but there are a bunch of famous people. I mean, people from the Civil War to, it's still an active cemetery today. But the cemetery is the original landscaping of Brooklyn. a famous battle in the Revolutionary War took place there, and it's just absolutely beautiful the way that they keep the trees and there's wildlife and everything around there. And so, between the park and the cemetery, I think it offers these two spaces that kind of surround this little, very residential neighborhood. And, we kind of, I don't know, I would walk through the cemetery or run through the park and get ideas for some of this stuff that I think a lot of folks, around here kind of could relate to. And then the other thing that's really kind of special about my neighborhood, I think, is, I have really gotten to know the neighbors and almost more so than I think I experienced growing up in the suburbs of St. Louis. I have a great relationship with my landlord, believe it or not. Like, that's almost unheard of, but he lives down the street. I teach his daughter guitar, and she plays some of this music with me in her lessons. She just turned 17. And I also have a number of other students on the block. I think at one point I had like 7 students just on my block, and working with my neighbors as music students, and then also sharing these experiences with them. You get to know each other kind of in a really special way. I mean, I'm talking about, like, I've got students who are kids, and I also teach their mom or dad. So I got to know people in that respect, and they also got to know my music a little bit better through that experience. So, there's just this community that I don't think a lot of I certainly never experienced in other neighborhoods in New York, and I don't know that everybody necessarily experiences that, but the community that was built is very much like, these are the kind of places where you want to live and feel comfortable spending a good portion of your life, just kind of around people who you can count on.
It's interesting. I was thinking about how this, time since March, April of 2020 has kind of undulated and things have unfolded. I had just moved in January 2020, and you can appreciate this, to the actual hometown of Pat Metheny in Lee Summit, Missouri. And and I remember everybody coming out, like I never ever see anybody out. Like, I'm sure in a place that's urban, like Brooklyn, you see people outside no matter what all the time. You just don't see that in a suburb out here outside of Kansas City often at all. So I remember that time period where it was like, wow, like Snow White and all the animals just woke up. And it's very weird because I don't even see that anymore now. It was kind of a 2 or 3 month thing. I think that was a part of the whole initial shock of what was going on. But it's interesting that that's kind of the fabric of what you've done. So my question is, with this new album and the possibility for live shows and just kind of a new year right now, as you look back on this quarantine, what did you maybe learn about yourself that you didn't realize before that's going to make you stronger as you reemerge with an album and the possibility of new shows?
Also, well, during this period, I also turned 40, and I think turning 40 kind of gave me a little bit of reflection as well. And one thing that I've learned about myself, and especially it relates to my music, absolutely, is that I kind of have let go of being concerned about what other people think of me. I make music really just for myself, and I think that in a lot of ways it becomes more honest, it becomes more personal in a way, and without trying to make it, a particular type of art necessarily. Like, people actually tend to be a little bit more drawn to it when it's just kind of more open. I'm not necessarily worried about what people might think of some of this stuff. And I think that this album that Charlie and I made reflects that a lot, because when you look at the songs, if you really look at the songs, they kind of run this spectrum of stylistically, some of it is very simple, some of it is far more complex. Hopefully it kind of sounds simple still, but I'm doing this. I'm doing a lot more for myself in a, I don't like to think of it as or I hope it doesn't sound too selfish, but I just try to be more honest with myself and not try to, worry too much that I'm fitting into certain boxes or something like that, or something that I probably did earlier on in my career.
So you grew up in St. Louis?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Talk to me a little bit about growing up in St. Louis and kind of some early musical influences and kind of moving into that timeline of where you're at now.
Yeah, St. Louis, it's interesting. I've got friends that are in Kansas City now, friends I grew up in St. Louis and, are in Lee Summit, for example. And, I kind of know the similarities a little bit between the two towns, obviously just across the state from each other. But St. Louis has a great music scene, and growing up, I was very fortunate to be a part of that. In the 90s, there was kind of that swing band revival a little bit, and even though I was in high school, I was playing in a band with guys that were they were probably about 40 in their 30s or 40s at the time, and they really told me just some very simple ideas that at the time I heard but didn't really digest until I got a bit older. And I think that a lot of that kind of influenced, sort of in a very long term, but it certainly influenced the way that I think about being a professional musician. And also the music in St. Louis is a little bit more laid back in a sense. Not that people can't dig in and certainly play, but if you think about Pat Metheny's music, for example, it's very kind of expansive. Even like the music just stretches out, and it kind of sounds like the kind of music that you make in open spaces and areas where you can kind of get out and see for miles or something. And you don't think of that in an urban space, right? You often in like New York City, you walk out the door and you can't really see the horizon. There's just a bunch of buildings and people or whatever, in your sight lines. And, I think that kind of, I certainly write music whenever I'm out of the city. There's just something about, open spaces and kind of being a little bit more relaxed in the environment that find inspiring. And I think a lot of that came from growing up in a place like St. Louis. I grew up in the suburbs, so I wasn't that far from driving, outside of the city to go do things, or driving downtown to play a gig. And, there was kind of a lot of, diversity in the environment there, I think. All that certainly influenced the type of music that I make today. And I think the musicians that I was exposed to at the time, and some of the people who were my teachers, kind of taught me some big truths about being a musician and making the most out of every musical situation. And I try to do that today. I try to live up to that. I try to kind of share that knowledge with younger musicians when it seems like they might be receptive to it.
So what was the first live jazz show you saw that really made you think, wow, I'd love to do that?
I think one of the earliest shows that I saw that I really, I think had a big impact on me was Stanley Jordan doing a solo guitar piece. I don't know I'm sure you're familiar with Stanley Jordan with like the two-hand tapping technique, which is not at all how I play guitar or would even be interested in playing. But at the time, it was just such a sort of like out of this world experience for me. And I remember seeing that concert with my dad, and my dad is an engineer and really has no musical background. And he just was like, well, what just happened? How did somebody even do that? So the magic that kind of happened in that show, I think, was a big inspiration for me. In St. Louis, there were a number of just local musicians who would play down at, there's this bar called BB's Jazz, Blues and Soup, and there was a big band that would play there led by this trombonist, Keith Ellis, who passed away years ago. But seeing that band, just local musicians play, also really inspired me to, just go out there and try to be try to figure out how to be the best that I could be, because they just all seemed to me to be masters of what they were doing.
So what brought you to Brooklyn?
At the time, my fiance and I were living in Indiana, and I think we both just had this idea of wanting to move to New York kind of after college. We were at Indiana University in Bloomington, and it just felt like, there's a lot of opportunity in New York. And early on, in I guess junior high or so, my dad had this tradition of taking me and my siblings out to lunch. And one of the pieces of wisdom that he kind of put out there for us was, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know, you kind of have a choice to either choose what you want to be and then go where you need to go to be able to do that, or choose where you want to live and figure out what you need to be able to do to be able to maintain a life there. New York kind of seemed like a place where there was just a lot of opportunity to pursue music and types of things that my wife was interested in. And at the same time, it just seemed like a really cool place to want to live. And I figured if I could just get there, I'll figure out what I need to do to survive so we can stay here for as long as possible. And so we've been here for 17 years now, and I think that there's a lot of things that I've experienced that I couldn't have experienced somewhere else.
So what's the best thing every day waking up being a professional musician? What do you like the best about the process?
It comes in waves. You know, there's times where you're constantly having to learn music for certain types of gigs that simply, you know, are going to pay bills. And so there's a little bit of just putting the work in, you know, that goes into it. With the pandemic, obviously, there hasn't been as many live performance opportunities, and so I haven't had to learn as much music. So a lot of my kind of practice time has been to just, you know, the fundamentals of music just never are, it's something that you never really escape. You're always going to be working on that. And I think that, you know, just opening up a book and reading a melody or playing, you know, some Bach or something on a, you know, regular basis, there's a little bit of freedom and humility that comes from that experience. No matter, you know, maybe it gets easier as the more you do it, of course, and as a professional, it's like, that's what you have to do. But I think a process of just, I really enjoy the process of working on music and trying to, you know, maintain certain skills and get better at certain skills and write more music and write different types of music. And just that kind of daily process is something that I really enjoy. And I think that that's kind of what we all want to strive for in whatever we're doing, is enjoy the day-to-day and not necessarily worry about what the end goal is, if there is one. You know what I mean? It's just, you get up and do the work and enjoy it.
So if you could go to a dream gig, get into a time machine, jazz DeLorean, so to speak, and punch in the coordinates, what jazz show would you love to see in the history of music? Where would you go?
I would love to go back and see some of those, or one of the Jazz at the Philharmonic concerts that Norman Granz, you know, was putting on way back in, I guess it was like in the 50s, or, you know, there's a bunch of those shows were recorded. I just, you know, but those had Charlie Parker and, you know, Dizzy Gillespie and Ella Fitzgerald and all these different iconic musicians were playing back then, you know, in this show. And it would just be amazing to just see something like that.
You know, we've been kind of run through the ringer here in a lot of ways with COVID, especially as musicians, with gigs that have fallen away and just things that have happened. So, you know, as this new year opens up and we do get back to gigs, because there were live gigs for a while, it kind of undulated with this variant. When it does kind of come back in earnest, what do you hope the musician and the audience really realizes about the power of live music?
Well, I mean, I hope that musicians are, you know, in general are kind of like grateful of the opportunity to play. You know, we certainly, I think like anybody, you kind of get used to the, you know, doing the same sort of routine when you go to play your gigs. There's certainly a lot of people who are, you just get extremely grateful of the opportunity to play once you haven't been able to do it for a while. And similarly, I would hope that the audience sees like what is special about that experience. You know, we've certainly all gotten used to staying home and doing things from home and consuming entertainment, you know, from our sofas. You know, hopefully people that go out to shows just you know, have the patience to sit there for 45 minutes or an hour or whatever it is and hear really hear the music and appreciate what the musicians are bringing to that experience for them for that period of time.
So everyone has a perception or an idea of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. You have a perception of yourself. Who do you think you are?
Oh man, that's a big question. I honestly, I just try to be generous, and I try to be authentic to myself. And, I certainly identify as a musician and as a guitar player and as a guitar teacher. But I also try to just identify as like a person that can maybe make somebody's day a little bit better. I mean, I kind of joke around how like when I go to the grocery store, I'm always getting things off of the high shelves for people. I'm not even that tall. I'm 6'1", but there's always little old ladies that like need to reach something that's just out of their grasp, and just simply doing that kind of thing can make somebody's day a little bit better, and being helpful. I think that all of that contributes to like making better music in the end. So, that's kind of who I try to be, and hopefully that's how other people perceive me. But, if not, that's okay. Maybe they'll come around to it someday.
Cameron, hey man, thank you for opening up with Neon Jazz, taking some time out. Good luck with the album and the return to the stage in this new year. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in St. Louis, Brooklyn, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Cameron, we talked to him in 2016, and again now, it's always great to catch up. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.